It was yesterday, November the 1st, that Imago turned 51. It's amazing. Established as a registered charity back in 1972, I'm referring to it as a boutique organization. How about that? I just made that up earlier today. It's a boutique organization. It's not big, nor do we want to become big, but its influence is wide. It was providing support for artists and for projects in the arts. I've been the executive director since 1998, and if you do the math, 25 years. And it's been a very, very enriching journey for me and for Marion, as we have watched Imago's network expand, projects numbers multiply, and as well as fairly regular public events like this one. Before my arrival on the scene with Imago, it was under the leadership, innovative leadership, I should say, of Wilbur Sutherland, the founding director. Wilbur Sutherland was director from 1972 until his death in 1997. I believe that his vision for Imago was well ahead of its time, as he worked for, as best he could, to create a safe place for artists. And he has done that, I think, in a wonderful way. And artists of faith were those who were, and I often say this about what Imago it means, artists of faith were those folk who were often, not always, but often marginalized by the church because of their art, and marginalized by the culture because of their faith. It was the purpose of Imago to create a safe place for artists where their faith and their art could be affirmed. It was just recently that I had the privilege of meeting Jenifer Sutherland. Jenifer is a daughter of Wilbur and Barbara, and I have asked her if she would come and say a few words this evening, just to sort of launch the evening. Remember, we're trying to do quite a bit tonight, more than was wise, but I'm known for that, I think. I just asked my wife. But what we're doing is we're acknowledging 51 years of Imago. We're acknowledging 25 years for Marion and I, and we're also noting C.S. Lewis's the anniversary of his death back in 1963, so it's 60 years since the death of C.S. Lewis. And my good friend, who I'll say something about later, Ron Dart, will pull all that together for us. But right now, I want to say, Jenifer, I'm very pleased that you're here. I'm glad you're willing to come and say a few words about your parents and how, in their very innovative ways, they were responsible for creating Imago. Please welcome Jenifer Sutherland.
I am very happy and proud to be here to help celebrate the 51st anniversary of Imago. To prepare for this evening, I had a look at the Imago Arts website. I smiled as I read the titles of books, the invitations to conversation and participation. What I saw there gave me the vivid sense that 26 years after his death, I was talking to my father. I imagined his face open and excited. I'm in, let's talk. Conversation for him was not about being nice or right or polite. Rather, it was about engaging with the difficult and exciting challenge of being human and being Christian. So thank you, John Franklin, for reconnecting me with my father across all these years. My father chose the name Imago. In the image of God, the Creator, we are created, because he believed that creating is the essence of Christian life. The wonder of creation. He'd studied physics at university, not because he was a scientist, he told me, but because the world was so beautiful. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. What does that mean? Over years of listening to people talking about their struggles to bring themselves fully into Christian faith and community, he came to understand that the creative part of the self, the artist, had often been hurt by the logocentric focus of Christian teaching. He himself had had a rigid upbringing, his mother a strict Plymouth Brethren. Her Scottish father ran a bottling factory for non-alcoholic ginger beer, as well as sheep dip. One night, a local story has it, a sailor wandered into the factory and drank a bottle of the wrong stuff. My grandmother had a sense of adventure and perhaps self-preservation. She left Scotland by ship and train, and after a quick station marriage to a man she'd met once in Liverpool, by ship again to settle with him in Bella Coola. My father spent his early years worrying about cougars and grizzly bears. When her husband died, my grandmother took young Wilbur on a mission to South Africa. On a later voyage, en route to India, their ship was turned back to England by German U-boats. In the beginning was the Word. My father loved story and words. In addition to the Bible and C.S. Lewis, we read Lewis Carroll and Rudyard Kipling and many, many others. He loved the sounds of words, rolling them around in his mouth with pleasure. And yes, he loved to teach and to preach. Paul among the Canadians. He dedicated his life to guiding communities of believers. My mother loved something other than the word. Take, read, tolle, legge is at the heart of the story of the church. But the message that ran through Barbara's life was lift, dance. Bill Aid encouraged her to take the ballet shoes down from the cupboard and put them on. She never took them off again. In fact, she danced into her last breath. She taught at the National Ballet School. Two of my sisters went there, first Rebecca, then Jacqueline. But the rupture with InterVarsity came finally with my mother's involvement in the theater company Creation 2, a chapter of my family's life that began at Expo 67 in Montreal. The Monday night prayer meetings at Cheriton Avenue. What a time of tumult and discovery. So much of it was wonderful, and a lot of it was sad. The leadership of InterVarsity was concerned about Creation 2. Its rehearsal warm-ups used breath, they worried, in a way to circumvent reason. Likewise, the practice of praying in tongues. My father was never granted any of the spiritual gifts, he told me. What he was given, I believe, was the revolutionary gift of listening. One of the memories I have from those days at Cheriton Avenue is of him sitting on the floor face to face with whoever had come to the house, whatever age or background, listening. He went on long walks with people, again, listening. These many individuals, as well as my mother, Bill Mason, Bill Aid, Louis Capson, David Walden, Rosemary Kilbourne, deepened for him the vital conversation of Christian faith and community that led him to found Imago. And so tonight, thank you all for being here, for listening. Thank you, John Franklin, for committing so much of your time, mind, heart, and vision to this work, and to Marion. Both of you have carried Imago Arts forward into and beyond the 50th year, strong and vital as ever. The conversation continues.
Thank you, Jenifer. It's wonderful to have you here and wonderful to hear a little of that story. Ron Dart is our guest tonight to give a talk. And when I was thinking about this evening, I knew I wanted Ron Dart to be a part of it. He has this extraordinary capacity to make connections where you would never have imagined there were connections to make. And I have enjoyed over many years conversations with Ron. Whenever Marion and I are on the West Coast, we stay with Ron and Karen Dart, and it's like a second home. Let me say a little bit about Ron. Ron taught at the Department of Political Science, Philosophy, and Religion at the University of the Fraser Valley for almost 35 years. He was on staff with Amnesty International in the 1980s, and Ron has published more than 40 books. He's been on the national executive for the Thomas Merton Society, and he can tell you stories about correspondence between Thomas Merton and C.S. Lewis, which I never imagined had happened. He has also published articles on Lewis and Merton, and sorry, the light's not good here. I'm not seeing my own writing. He's been an advisor to the Inklings Institute out at Trinity Western University. And he's lectures quite often on work related to and individuals related to Lewis and others. Ron has also taught courses on the Inklings at Trinity Western University, and most recently he gave a lecture, was it just last week, Ron, on George MacDonald and German Romanticism. I don't know how many of you are familiar with George MacDonald, but he was a key influence on Lewis and Tolkien and others. All those things are good things about Ron, but I've invited him here because he's a dear friend, and he's someone who is able to give you this sort of bird's eye view of things. And so I'm very, very pleased to have Ron here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Ron Dart, who will give us a talk.
Well, I might say it's always a great joy to have John and Marion bunk in with us when they come west, and our conversations go well into the night and often well into the morning as well, and we'll go out for dinners and we continue to discuss, and John and Marion, like Wilbur, have a very, very unique gift of listening and being present, and in that sense the torch was passed on from Wilbur to John and Barbara to John and Marion. And so this gift of listening, and out of listening to think through what the arts might mean and the relationship of the arts and painting and music and culture, is so essential. And often when people, the ears of their soul are deaf, then in fact these essential elements of what it truly means to live in the image of God is muted. It becomes clouded over. And so, but what I've been asked to do tonight, I feel a bit like the Aesop's fable of the fox and the hedgehog. The fox scampers over all sorts of terrain, but unlike the hedgehog, I'm not going to have an opportunity to dig a little and burrow a little deeper. I'm going to be scampering like a scamp over all sorts of territory. And so what I've been asked to do, this being the 60th anniversary of Lewis's death, the anniversary, the birth really of Imago until Wilbur's death, and then John and Marion taking over, to cover, like the fox, all sorts of terrain that I can only scamper, dash over, ramble over. And so Lewis, let me start with C.S. Lewis then. Interestingly enough, in Canada, we've had a variety of organizations which have honored the Inklings, somewhat beginning with George MacDonald, who Lewis said baptized his imagination. My mother was very involved with the Toronto C.S. Lewis Society, of which Wilbur was a key founding member of that society, and I'm going to reflect on some of his articles in 1993 and 1994, in which he wrote about his own journey and how Lewis, in many ways, was almost like a Damascus experience for Wilbur reading C.S. Lewis, and then obviously branching out deeper and further as his journey unfolded. And so I'll touch on that, and then John and Marion's journey afterwards. But in Canada, we've had a couple of societies, one on the west coast, which is where we're from and where Wilbur originated from, Salt Spring Island, and then Bella Coola, which is a lovely little place up in one of the fjords up on the coast. Gorgeous little place, but very, very small. This particular one, the Toronto group, lasted for about 15 years. As I said, my mother was involved, and Wilbur contributed to it quite a bit. And then there was a much larger one out on the west coast, the C.S. Lewis Society, which published some pretty sophisticated articles over about 35 years. And out of that was formed then the Inklings Institute of Canada at Trinity Western 10 years ago. So I've been on that board, and they produce really fine and substantive work going from MacDonald, Chesterton, Lewis, Tolkien, Dorothy Sayers, Charles Williams, Owen Barfield, all these key figures which have played a substantive role in moving Christianity away from a purely an abstract, a dogmatic approach to the poetic, the image, the metaphor, the role of drama and story and myth as a way when listened to within the soul, a deeper understanding of what it means to know the self, know others, and the journey through life itself. Let me just touch on 6 elements of Lewis that I think we find in Wilbur's journey from some of his early publishing on Toronto C.S. Lewis Society, and then move into the work of Marion and John. 30 minutes is short. I'm used to lecturing for 3 hours, so I don't want to bore you with details. And so let me start with a few elements of C.S. Lewis. First of all, I think the role of the Inklings was one of opening up the arts, literature, imagination, myth, and the role of that in a version of Christianity which tended to be too much get your ideas right, get your creeds right, get your confessions right, get the objective truth right, but did not deeply relate, in fact, to the inner journey, the self, as we tried to make sense of our journey and the complex terrain and the landscape of the self. And the arts have a way of evoking, of calling forth, of summoning. And Wilbur saw this clearly, as did the Inklings. And this is why the Inklings have played such a significant role, I think, in reawakening and stirring into wakefulness this important element of the Christian faith, which has often been minimized, rejected, marginalized. And the Inklings and Lewis were very much a part of that. The second thing would be, in Lewis, very much one of engaging culture. Not retreating from the world that we live in, but saying, what does the Christian message in a thoughtful way, a deeper way, a reflective way, an artistic way, what can it speak to the bigger culture that we lived in? So C.S. Lewis taught at Oxford, taught at Cambridge, very involved. Friend of mine is just finishing a book on the history of the Socratic Club, the dates, the people that spoke, particularly people who challenged Christianity, but Lewis was front and center. So he never retreated from the world that we lived in. He was always willing to listen to the other, to engage others who were grappling in an honest and transparent way with the big questions of life, issues of tragedy, of suffering, and what does it mean to live life in a more meaningful, a more authentic manner. And so Lewis very much embodied this, and I think we can see this working out in what Imago has tried to do. Not a retreat into a Christian ghetto, but a meaningful engagement. Lewis was also willing to see the truth of other philosophic traditions, other religious traditions that perhaps could be truer at times than people who were committed to the Christian faith, but they'd shrunk it to a narrow, small way that did not speak meaningfully to people in the world. And Wilbur has a lovely article in one of his early 1993 edition of Pilgrimage on how Lewis spoke to him on this element. And we also see, for example, in the last battle of the Chronicles in Narnia, in which one of the figures, a part of the Calormines, Emeth, is someone who seems to be part of the enemy. But Aslan says, in your search, even though you were not a Narnian, you did not explicitly know Aslan, you in fact probably understood the truth deeper than those who in fact were Narnians. Interesting enough, Emeth was patterned after a former student of Lewis's at Oxford, Mahoud Manzalawi, who came from Egypt. He, in fact, was hired at UBC, and I spent the last days with Mahoud Manzalawi. Came from Egypt, background was the Muslim Brotherhood, a very narrow form of Islam at the time with Lewis. Then he ended up where we were at UBC, and his last years I spent this lovely time with him, and he talked about how Emeth, in the last battle, was very much patterned after his searching when with Lewis, and then the many discussions with Lewis. Another important figure in Lewis's life was Bede Griffith, who became probably one of the most important Roman Catholics of the 20th century, engaged in Christian Hindu dialogue. I did a book on Lewis and Bede Griffiths called Soul Friends, and Lewis dedicated Surprised by Joy to Bede Griffiths. And so you have in Lewis this openness to people who don't seem to be explicitly from the Christian tradition, but in fact may be closer to the truth in their honesty and quest than people who claim explicitly to be part of such a tradition. So again, this comes to listening, having the ears of one's soul attentive and woken up to perhaps deeper, more dynamic truths than getting one's creeds and exegesis and theology perfect. And so this is important also in what Lewis has passed on. I might also add that Lewis had a very ironical ecclesiology. We hear about mere Christianity, and he kept the mere. This was very important. He knew how to traverse different denominational heritages in an age when denominations tended to turn on one another and recognize, again, why do we have to be frozen or entombed in a certain view of history when in fact there are great truths within these traditions as well. I was in the 1970s doing my MA at Regent College, and Jim Houston was the principal at that time. And it was fascinating as we chatted, and I was working with him in 1947 to 1953. He lived with one of the most prominent Orthodox theologians at Oxford, and Jim and C.S. Lewis, and this particular thinker who Lewis called an Oxford institution, they met with one another regularly. So we can see in C.S. Lewis this ironic ecclesiology. Don't get bogged down excessively in particular denominationalism. It may blind, it may deaf, and rather than opening the ears of the soul, it may put ideological wax in the ears of the soul. So an ironical ecclesiology. Also, I think in Lewis there is a latent ecological vision. We see it certainly in Chronicles of Narnia, his space trilogy. There's a sensitivity, first of all, to the animals that don't speak, but also there is a whole range of potentially animals that have lost the ability to speak, but in fact there is a life and dynamism here if we have but, again, ears to hear of what's going. So an earlier form of animal rights and ecology. And the hideous strength, we see Lewis very much looking at what happens when a certain type of technology takes over, and the implication on people's lives, the land, the relationship of people and land, nature and humans. And so in the Inklings and in Lewis, there's this early ecological vision. We can see this very much at Wilbur's, again, one of his early articles in 1993, that he writes about the and this is 1993, and we're obviously a few decades after that, very much concerned about ecology, global warming, and many of these things. So we have this almost prophetic understanding that is emerging from the Inklings that Wilbur is going to internalize, he's going to articulate, and he's going to make the genetic code or DNA of Imago in many ways. Wilbur makes it very clear in these articles that it was in 1945. He was in Kingston in the military. He'd come from the West Coast, and a woman handed him a little copy of Screwtape Letters. And he talks about this totally reshaped how he understood Christianity, the nature of Christianity, how one approaches Christianity. And of course, much of his work with InterVarsity in the early years was on campus, universities, where in fact at a certain point, Christianity was brought to the dock. It was being criticized. And so how does one respond to tough questions from the university context without slipping into simplistic answers or the university's a terrible place to be, it rejects Christianity. Well, that's sort of simplistic either or. It just doesn't work in any meaningful way. And certainly Lewis at Oxford and Cambridge, and then Wilbur with InterVarsity of the universities, and then breaking out of the universities with Imago as well, speaking to a much larger artistic community, spoke to these issues as well. And so the Lewis world that Wilbur as a young man had internalized, he wrote quite perceptively, insightfully, eloquently in the Toronto C.S. Lewis newsletter, Pilgrimage. And my mother used to send me these constantly. She in Toronto, me on the West Coast, and I contributed probably 7 or 8 articles to Pilgrimage when finally it was shut down and the editors both died within a couple of months of one another, tragically. So lovely couple. And so the last one I'll mention, Lewis, is the hospitality. Many would come when Lewis was a tutor at Oxford, then going over to Cambridge. He could be rigorous in asking hard questions of students who didn't want to think, didn't want to put the hard work on, but when he knew they were really grappling with meaningful issues, he would spend hours with them, listening, engaging, kindly challenging, sometimes firmly challenging. The letters that he wrote, obviously, the house of his soul was a big one of hospitality. And anyone who reads the thousands of letters of C.S. Lewis and the time he would take every day to respond to people who were inquiring honestly about their journey from his writings, the world they live in, questioning their own faith when it was too silly or shallow, that didn't make sense anymore. He almost was a pastor, an intellectual pastor in that sense. And so we have these 6 elements then of C.S. Lewis that Wilbur is going to draw from. And in the 1993 article he wrote, as well as a 1994 one in the Toronto C.S. Lewis community, the Pilgrimage, you can see all of these 6 points that have been internalized, they've been made the warp and the woof of Wilbur Sutherland's life, and he gradually broadens out in his thinking. Interesting enough, when he was young, when the first book of Lewis was presented to him, he had been told that he shouldn't be reading C.S. Lewis. This was a dangerous person to read that could undermine your faith. And so he of course, this would be a wonderful challenge. Well, that's what they think. Well, I'm going to read more of them. And so he took these challenges, internalized them, which made him a listening person who heard the soul questions of students, heard the spirit longings of artists, and was able to respond to them in an attentive, what Simone Weil talks about, an attentive way. And in one sense, isn't that what all of we need, people who listen to the deeper parts of our human longing? And for some of us, the tears go so deep, it's hard to find them at times. And people who are trying to, in many ways, find their journey, they need someone who is there to listen, to really be there. And then when they sense they're listened to, doors start opening in the house of the soul, and people start coming out of certain rooms that they feel, geez, if I come out, I might be criticized or alienated. And so these, I've touched, this is again, I feel like the fox here scampering over important elements. But in C.S. Lewis, the Toronto C.S. Lewis Society, of which Wilbur was a founding member of, he wrote regularly, and I brought some of the articles, which, as I said, my mother would send me regularly. Now just moving on briefly, how much time do I have? 5 minutes? Okay, I have 5 minutes for John and Marion. What can I say? They deserve 3 hours, or they deserve a semester to reflect on that. Karen and I have always been grateful to have, 10 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes, okay. You got the time right. We've always been very grateful to have John and Mary bunk in us when they come west. It's a privilege of ours, and we always know when they turn up, one, we won't be sleeping as much as we usually sleep, and we'll be sleeping in probably later in the morning because we've gone well into the night with wonderful discussions. Marion is always generously and kindly and gracious us leaving books. We just had sort of a high tea with them before we came over here this afternoon, and they're piling us with more gifts of books that are going to keep us busy, some great poets, other fine works. And so I think John and Marion embody those 6 points. I think that I've mentioned in C.S. Lewis. I think Wilbur and Barbara internalized. Also, the notion of the dance is so important. Thomas Merton, one of his more significant works at New Seeds of Contemplation, it ends with people who understand their faith the deepest. It's like a dance. And learning to dance with others is learning very intricate dance steps. There's a lovely quote from Bunyan. He said, he footed it well and she answered him handsomely. And knowing how to foot it well and to answer handsomely the steps that are coming in way, that involves a certain lightness of an interior life and yet an attentiveness of the interior life in many ways, of which books are pointers. Books are never ends in themselves, but good books, good authors, thoughtful women and men take us to places in our journey that awaken us. They kiss into wakefulness. Parts of us we may not even be aware of. And so John and Marion, with their multiple gifts of books, every book they send our way, it opens up to Karen and I more parts of their rich mother lode of personalities and their journey together in many ways. And I would say of these elements that I mentioned in Lewis and Wilbur, each one of them are found in John and Marion. And it's not something they think, well, Imago is these 6 points, we have to align ourselves with these 6 points. It's just part of who they are as people. There's no mandate that says you have to follow these 6 points legalistically. It's just there's hospitality, and I think anyone who's had an experience being invited over to John and Marion's or the many events they have put on, both here and at their home, knows that the hospitality found in Lewis, found in Imago, Barbara and Wilbur Sutherland, and in John and Mary, it's part of what has massaged, shaped, and made them who they are, and made Imago hence an attractive and appealing place which holds people's longing and says, this is what faith could be, might be, and is, where there are men and women and children who embody this in a meaningful manner. John and Marion's work a few years ago before COVID, when they were involved with the art gallery, they were the book that came out, Mystical Landscapes, Van Gogh to Emily Carr. Out in the West Coast, of course, the Ballywick of Emily Carr. Last time, I think John Marion went out to the Audain Museum at Whistler. It has the biggest private collection of Emily Carr. But again, the mystical landscapes, it looks at how painters and poets, along with essays that were a part of that book, often see deeper. They understand the connection between land and human soul and animals. Sometimes in a way a certain sterile rationalism doesn't in quite the same way, that detaches itself, whereas when the artists participate in what they are doing, there's a depth of wisdom and understanding. And the mystical landscapes, I'm sure many of you have that book or maybe got to that, 216, 217. It was a brilliant exhibition of which John contributed a rich article which taps into, in the Christian tradition, often the danger is that people want to be too sure of themselves, and we have in theology called the via positiva, or the cataphatic in the Greek sense. But John touches on the dark night. I did a lecture at Trinity last week, and I looked at Novalis, great German poet's Hymns of the Night, which George MacDonald picked up on. And so they often, when people go deeper, they go into clouds of unknowing, they go into places of uncertainty, they go into places of where is God in the midst of tragedy, of suffering, and how do we answer, or should we even try to answer those, or do we just listen? Do we just listen, and do we just listen, and do we just listen, and do we... and so this Mystical Landscapes is just an amazing book of some of the finest paintings from 19th, 20th centuries, ending with Emily Carr. There's a brilliant one that the Audain Museum has just picked up. It's called Survivor. It's the owners of Audain. This one has not been shown. It's the story of a single tree. Obviously, the forest has been clear-cut, and just one survives. What a prophetic painting. What a prophetic painting of this one lingering, holding on while all the brothers and sisters have gone down because of big logging companies indeed. And so there's this ecological vision that held the attention of many, that 216, 217. These Stations of the Cross, I think most of you are acutely aware. When was that, 2 years ago or 1 year ago? 2 years ago. The work that went into that, the planning that COVID interrupted a bit, the coordination, the integration, that's about hospitality. That's about integrating with people who come from very different backgrounds, asking how can we work together to present a richer vision of what the Stations of the Cross may look like as we travel real streets in a city, and reading those, not just reading them as objects, but them reading us on our journey. And the amount of work and integration that went into that, it was a work of genius of many wonderful painters and artists and people writing that I think says obviously a lot about John and Marion and their ongoing work. And so Imago, I know we're gonna have a brief discussion, so there's so much I could say just about John and Marion, and back of them is Wilbur and Barbara. Fascinating how dance was so important, and often temperamentally the danger is we freeze our own temperaments. So Wilbur had an openness to the temperament of his wife in which dancing was primary. It's what made her soul sing. It gave wings to her soul. And each person has to ask, in almost the Platonic sense, is what are the wings that are kept too tight around me, and who are the people that can assist me to give me wings to fly under the blue canopy? And that, in a sense, what Lewis was trying to do. It's what the Inklings were trying to do. It's what Imago and Wilbur and Barbara were trying to do. And often there is opposition. There'll be misunderstanding. There's going to be caricatures in that process. But nobody wants to retreat into bitterness or anger. That's a cliff's edge that takes people nowhere. And those deeper soul dives in which people say, where is the real center of creativity? And allow that to live, to be birthed, to be midwifed. And I think the heritage of the Inklings of Lewis, Wilbur, Barbara, Imago, and then how John and Marion have carried on, it's really a testament to a group of people that emerged in the 19th and 20th century. That vision was picked up, it was internalized by others, and has been carried on in Canada. I'll briefly end very shortly with two other people, and I won't linger long with them, but two of the great Canadians I've done some work on over the years and spent time on their homes. One is George Grant, probably known as the best Canadian public philosopher of the 20th century, died in 1988. And I've often spent time at their home in Halifax, and when Sheila would come out here. But George Grant studied at Oxford, and it was his time in the Socratic Club, and that really centered him and focused him on what it meant to be a person of philosophical faith, grappling with these issues that he would not give easy answers to as he aged through life. So the other would be another person who some of you would know from locally more Toronto, is the well-known novelist, just jumped out of my head, Robertson Davies. When Robertson Davies went over to Oxford, he was quite involved with C.S. Lewis and the Socratic Club as well, and he had the highest view of Lewis, the Socratic Club, what they were attempting to do. So the Inklings have had, and Lewis in particular, have had a significant impact on Canada, the Inklings Institute of Canada, the Toronto C.S. Lewis Society, many others, as well as important Canadian cultural icons. And Robertson Davies, obviously one of our finest novelists. And so Lewis, Inklings, the story goes on, and Canadians who again are listening to deeper speech, and their ears are increasingly open to what that means, carry on that rich story of myth, symbol, poetry, music, paintings, and how it can speak to us. And I think my 10 minutes is up.
Make it work. Yes, you made it work. He does magic. Just a few minutes of conversation here. Ron, we live in a very, polarized and, hostile world in many ways. There's a lot of tensions between people, and I'm wondering if you could just say something about how you think the arts might speak into that, and some of the characteristics that you were talking about there that Lewis and Wilbur have. I mean, we need something, and there's many ways to express this, but we need a redemptive presence in the world. We need something that brings us together rather than pushes us apart. So can you say something about how this approach that you're talking about might be helpful?
Yes, I think great works of literature in art and music and painting and dance, if they're seen in a contemplative, meditative way, they slow us down, they speak to us, they ask us to hear, they encourage us not to jump to silly conclusions about other people, about other ideas. And so learning, just as the dangers we read a text as an object rather than the text reading us, so when we approach paintings or music or poetry or literature or dance, if we have an attentive imagination in mind, it's what is it speaking to the mystery of our unfolding uniqueness that cannot be answered in cliches and simple answers. I've tried over the years, to some of you have probably heard of Jordan Peterson. I have one of my students that helped launch him at UT in 2016. And he asked if he could have dinner with my wife and I a few months ago. And most of my friends know I'm not on obviously the same page as him. And they said, why would you even ask the person into your house? And I said, I did most of my doctoral studies in Martin Buber's I and Thou. I said, be wary of reducing someone to a nit. One does not have to agree with them, but meet them as a thou. Try and hear where they're coming from. And we had an animated 3-hour conversation. His wife is very much a contemplative Roman Catholic. And for me, the arts, at their best, initially have said, be still, listen, look, don't jump to answers or conclusions. There's uncertainty, there's mystery on the journey, but you may have thoughts on that I don't.
One of the things that occurs to me, and I would be glad to hear you on this, but one of the things I think that faith and art hold in common is that they require from the person engaging with them to be in a posture of receptivity. Our culture calls us to be in a posture of control and manipulation. And the posture of receptivity, our muscles aren't very trained to get into that particular posture or position. And I think that that's one of the reasons people resist it. But on the other hand, it has an enriching experience. It is an enriching experience to come to the world in a posture of receptivity.
Many of you have followed the series by Sister Wendy Beckett, the BBC series. And it's fascinating, when she would go and do some of the great paintings, she's done a variety of series, she approached it very meditatively. There was no script. The people filming her were terrified of what she was going to say or not say. Right. But she had a meditative, a contemplative approach to look at some of the magnificent paintings of history. And her position as a Carmelite was that I will only understand what is being spoken through receptivity and a contemplative, meditative way. And I think good artists call forth that deeper part of us, the contemplative, the meditative, the receptive, so that we don't jump to conclusions or analyze this painting or analyze this poetry as an object or like we would a tree trunk or something. No, sit back and let it come to us. And some may take years for the poet's vision to enter. That's why I think we do a Shakespeare. What we find may be difficult in our teens, in our 30s, it's something more, in our 50s more, in our 60s more, and great works of literature, poetry, painting, dance. As we mature or deepen, hopefully we can hear what's being spoken from these wonderful women and men.
One of the issues, and this is my last question to you, is one of the issues is the imagination has not been treated very well.
No.
In our Christian communities, sorry to have to say this, but I think in many cases, the imagination is shriveled and doesn't even know how to engage with the world. And we need to find ways to exercise and embrace the imagination. Like everything else, including reason or whatever it may be, it has its risks and dangers, but it also has its rewards. So I think what you were talking about tonight was a lot about imagination, which sees possibilities, doesn't shut things down, but has a kind of openness to the world. Can you say something about imagination?
Yeah, images are like acorns. When they're thrown to us, they're potential oak trees. And if we can receive the acorn of a metaphor and allow it to grow in the soil of our soul, it can potentially become the oak tree in the forest. I think what happens also in a culture, to be simplistic, which is dominated by a certain rationalist, empirical, objective approach, imagination is seen as subjective. You can't trust imagination. It slips into subjectivity and fantasy. Well, just as reason can become distorted, so can imagination, but that doesn't mean you caricature the one and idealize the other as organs of knowing. And so, so mature imagination is what the Inklings were trying to get at. It's what Wilbur and Barbara were trying to get. It's what you and Marion are trying to get at. A mature understanding in the imagination that enriches, deepens, and gives us wings to fly in that Platonic sense, or the acorn to become the oak tree.
That's great. Yeah. Good. Thank you, Ron, and please join me in saying thank you to Ron. All right, I'm going to invite you for a 22-second stand-up. I don't know why I picked 22 seconds, but it doesn't matter. Just stand up and stretch a little bit. And forgive me if I give you a brief rant. At 4:30 today, I got a phone call and said, I'm sorry to tell you that the grand piano in Seeley Hall was damaged 2 days ago, and it's no longer there. And I, of course, said, what? I've been in this room many times, and the grand piano is always here. And I knew I had invited Mike Janzen, and then later Jeanine will play. And they said, well, look, we'll get you an electronic. So please sit down. Yeah, that's my rant. So I was very disappointed. But you know, one of the things you learn in the world of the arts, not least in music, is that improvisation is important. So we're improvising here, and Mike Janzen is just a great friend and has had many projects under Imago. This instrument, I think he didn't see before about an hour ago, and I think you're going to do some magic with it. I'm just very grateful to have you here, Mike. I've asked him to do a couple of pieces. Those of you who are, familiar with the Christian tradition and the hymn tunes, Mike, maybe you can say something about what you're going to play, but please join me in welcoming Mike Janzen.
Well, thank you so much, John. It is a real honor to be here tonight, and one of my favorite, and I'm in no way comparing myself, so now that I bring this up, I probably shouldn't, but Keith Jarrett did a wonderful concert. Some of you know that record of the Colon concert, and it was like supposedly just a terrible piano, so this is electric, so at least it's in tune. It's going to be good. Thank you, John and Marion. It's great to celebrate here with you. I don't know how many artists are in the room, but I'm guessing a whole bunch of us, and I actually don't really know where we would be without you guys, is the honest truth. Yeah. I can think of so many different times. I remember when I moved to Toronto, I heard about Imago, came to a couple events, and was like, oh, this is sort of interesting. But when I had my own project, I saw firsthand what you both did and the team that you guys were. the cheerleaders that you were, the hospitality that's been mentioned. And it was such a gift to me and to so many of us. I remember one time I didn't know what to do with this project, and I met with John a bit, and Marion said, let's have people over, and we had this wonderful night where I just played a bunch of new music. And what a gift, hey, to be able to have just a place to do that, people around you to encourage you, to believe in you, cheerlead you. So thank you, guys. Yeah, amazing. I'm going to start off. This is, I have no idea how to sound, but this is My Father's World. Thank you. And John made one request, so you've probably heard this one a few times, but it's jazz. So you never quite know what's going to happen. This is, I've decided to follow Jesus. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Maybe we didn't need the grand piano. I don't know. That was pretty good. Hey, that was pretty good. Yeah. Next on our program is Brad Woods. I've known Brad and Sylvia over many years. Brad is a storyteller. Sylvia is a visual artist. Wonderful folks, champions of the arts. At Imago's 40th, 11 years ago, right? At Imago's 40th anniversary event at Glen Gould Studio, I invited Brad to come and tell a story. And he did tell some of the Imago story. I was delighted that he got a few facts wrong, but that just made it a good story, because it often happens with good stories, right? But I decided that this evening I would invite Brad back to tell us another story about Imago. So please welcome Brad Woods.
This is a real honor. I feel like I'm in over my head here, and it's never easy to go up after Mike. That was impossible what he just did, I think, but that was amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled and honored to be here. I met John Franklin 35 years ago. Hard to believe. I was taking a course that he was teaching at what was then Ontario Bible College, sort of a philosophy course, Western Thought and Culture. Yeah, we called it Western Cult and Torture. I know, it's not that clever. I was only 19. It's not. And then we reconnected about 10 years later when a mutual friend invited me to an Imago event. So that's 25 years ago now. I want to pause right there and say that a different way, because I want to point out here that 25 years ago was when John took on leadership here, which means he has been sort of steering this ship through all sorts of waters for 25 years. Like, I don't know what you folks do during the day, what your jobs are, who you work for, or anything like that, but when you think of somebody in a role of leadership for 25 years, that's remarkable. It's remarkable. So congratulations, John. Yeah. So I went to this event, and I loved it. It blew me away. I couldn't believe it. And I've been coming back to these events as regularly and as faithfully as I can now for 25 years. And I keep coming back, year after year, time after time, season after season, because I'm always blown away, I'm impressed by the way John can curate a night that inspires me intellectually and creatively and spiritually all at the same time. It's really something special. But that's enough about John. He's not the reason that I keep coming back anyways. The artists that I've met through Imago, the musicians and writers and actors and painters and poets and dancers and photographers and filmmakers and thinkers and dreamers have literally changed my life. Because in my experience, every Imago artist that I've met does exactly what an artist is supposed to do. Exactly what I think an artist is supposed to do, and that is find a creative way to shine a light on the truth. But they're not the reason I keep coming back either. The reason I keep coming back to these events for 25 years, for a quarter of a century, for almost half my life, quite honestly, is because of the food. I know how that sounds. I know how that sounds, and it probably sounds like I've missed the whole point of the organization. But I haven't. You see, when we go to a show, my wife and I, or with friends, or with one of my kids, you go into the venue, you watch the show, and when it's over, you leave. Right? Maybe you go out for a drink. Hopefully you talk about it on the way home. But for the most part, when it's over, it's over. When you come to an Imago event, when the show is over, they discourage you from leaving. They encourage you to gather around the table, to eat and drink and talk about what's just happened and what it's meant to you. It kind of reminds me of the parable of the banquet, because everybody's included, from the executive director to the artist to the entire audience. In the end, everybody's welcome. Or maybe a better comparison would be the story of the fish and the loaves. Because somehow, whether it's a coffee house or a concert hall, there's always enough food. There's always more than enough food. As a matter of fact, we were at an event just a couple months ago now, maybe a month and a half ago, at the Timothy Eaton Chapel. And at the end of the night, when they were packing up, a buddy of mine and I were filling our pockets with brownies and butter tarts for the drive home to Guelph. That's okay to admit that, right? That's all right? Okay. And it's not just that there is food there. The food that is there is incredible. Like, this is not the egg salad sandwiches of the church events of my childhood. But I'll tell you, if there is an egg salad sandwich at an event, an Imago event, it'll be the best freaking egg salad sandwich you've ever had. So maybe a better comparison still is the feast at Canaan. Because every time that I have ever gathered around an Imago table, I almost expect something miraculous to happen. Now, for those of you that have been around for a while, that have come to any of these or many of these, you probably know where I'm going with this. But for anyone that's kind of new to Imago, I just want to make something really, really clear. When we're talking about the food at an Imago event, what we're really talking about is Marion Franklin. If you didn't know already, you've probably caught on tonight that Marion is John's better half, by far. And when we're talking about inspiration and creativity and hospitality and generosity, what we're really talking about is Marion. So I want to share a quote that's from Anthony Bourdain, the American chef and writer. And he said, when someone cooks for you, they're trying to say something, trying to tell you something about themselves, about where they're from, and about what makes them happy. And that is what Marion's been doing for all these years. She's been telling us her story. She's been including us in her story. And so Marion, on behalf of everybody here tonight, on behalf of everyone that can't be here tonight, and on behalf of everyone who's ever been to one of these things, thank you for feeding us. I just have one last thing to say. My wife Sylvia and I have been to many of these events, and we brought our kids a lot growing up. They're big fans of the whole Imago community, and they're sort of grown now and scattered all over the place. But there never is a time when we're at one of these events when one of them inevitably says, "Did you get any of Mrs. Franklin's chocolate chip cookies?" Now, I have never made chocolate chip cookies, which is strange because I've eaten a disproportionate amount of them over the years. Chocolate chip cookies are actually my love language, if anyone's interested. It was just a way to get us to get to know each other better. So I decided this was a good time to start. So Marion, these are for you, and you don't have to share them with any of us.
Thank you, Brad. He's absolutely right. Marion sets the tone for Imago events. As executive director of Imago, I'm accountable to a board. And I want to say I'm blessed to have a wonderfully supportive board. I'm grateful for each one of you. I won't ask you to stand up. I had thought of doing that, but I know that several of you are very shy. But one who isn't so shy is Elizabeth Downey, who has served as executive director, sorry, not executive director, that's me, has served as chair of the board for how many years, Liz?
A long time.
Okay, we'll just leave that. You all right? You're good? Okay. So I've asked Liz to come and say a few words, and please welcome Imago's board chair, Liz Downey.
I have a page of deathless prose here in front of me, but I can't see it very well, so my remarks will be brief. I was delighted to be invited to say a few words this evening, and it's always good when the history of an organization is reviewed, and it reminded me that I now understand better the theory about the stages of one's life. And I studied history for several years, and then I taught history for several years, and now I am history. And I'm delighted to be here. Hearing Jenifer's opening words about her father, of course, took me back to when I first encountered Wilbur Sutherland. I was a freshman, frosh, at the University of Western Ontario. And as an historical fact, in 1960, you could attend a full year of university for $465. I thought students and parents might appreciate hearing that. And then if you stayed 3 more years in an honors program, your tuition dropped to $425. And so I presented this to my parents and suggested that, in fact, I was saving them money by going to an honors program. And of course, they rationally pointed out that, well, yes, dear, you save each year, but there is an extra year of tuition that had to be found somewhere. Wilbur Sutherland came to speak. He was general director at the time of InterVarsity, I think, in Canada. And he came to speak to our student group. And a phrase that he said has stayed with me all my adult years. All truth is God's truth. And to an 18-year-old, that was quite profound, because here we were in the Christian students group, sort of a holy huddle, as we tended to find ourselves in, until we were given strength and inspiration. And that's what Wilbur Sutherland did for us as students. His clarity of thought, his characteristics of being such a good listener, of being present to you in the things which concerned you at any stage of life. He made a great impression on us, and it's lovely to hear these words about him spoken. And I certainly, after hearing Ron speak, I think we all should make an effort to uncover some of those articles that Wilbur wrote, and we can be reminded of the depth and the breadth of his particular thinking. When Imago was founded, maybe 2 or 3 years after, I actually turned Wilbur down, turned his invitation down to become a member of the corporation, partly because I didn't know what that meant. And I did have another chance to join the board when Penelope Tyndall was chair, and then I followed her in that position. And I was in the chair at the time of the 40th anniversary, and I'm not sure how many more before that. At that 40th anniversary, I remember saying at the Glen Gould Theatre that we have this message that we hold, and on one hand we say, come and see, and we talk about the Christian things, perhaps the theology, the great ideas, and then of course the other side of that is go and tell. And I hope you've heard enough tonight from the speakers, very substantial thoughts and concepts to give us inspiration in doing the work of the kingdom in this culture, in this day, and in this time. So I'm grateful to be included in this, hopeful of food as well. And thinking of food and the occasion, I, for one, have a very large cookbook collection. I love reading about books, and I love reading about the cultural context of food and so on. I'm less enamored of whatever it takes to get the recipes off the page and onto a plate. And I must admit, at my stage of life, even cooking a hot dog for a minute in the microwave is too long. And I go for something, maybe an egg salad sandwich, if the egg salad has been prepared somewhere else. But Marion, in her love for humanity, has a lovely cookbook collection, some of which she shared with me, and she loves to read the recipes, and she also loves the guests who are coming to her house, and she interprets those recipes, thinking about the group of people that she'll be entertaining that night. And the table is laid with beautiful food and very pleasing in its presentation. And so, Marion, we have a little gift for you from Imago to express our appreciation, so that you'll know how important you are to the success of Imago, and that you are loved and cared for. You may have gathered by now, Marion, that this is about you tonight.
I'm going to ask Don Martin, who has been at many Imago events. Don is a poet, and I'm asking him if he would come and read just two poems that are ones that Marion has enjoyed very much. Don's one, I think it's your most recent book, called Angelicus, is a collection of poems spoken from the standpoint of the angels. And there's a wide variety of perspectives that are given in this book. And once Marion got that, I had a copy and brought it home. She just read it the whole weekend. She was reading Angelicus, and she's enjoyed it a great deal. And in fact, bought a number of copies to give away. But Don Martin, please come and read two of Marion's favorite poems.
So when I was at home and I had a message on my machine, meaning my phone, went that from John about coming to read tonight. Did I ask you about coming to read tonight? Well, he hadn't, but that's okay, because I'd already told my friend Ross I was coming because I wanted to be here. So it's just an honor to be able to actually participate in more than just eating the food. So I was thinking about, Ron Dart's here. I'm going to read something from my book, Conspiracy of Light, which is poems all about C.S. Lewis. But when I called back, John and Marion were in the car, and Marion first started mentioning the poems she wanted to hear. So it's like, cool, okay, we'll do that. So forget about Lewis, sorry, Ron. But I'm going to read a couple from Angelicus. And one is about William Blake, and the other one is about Dorothy Sayers. And Marion, you understand why these are fascinating characters to her. And as John mentioned, all of these poems are written from the point of view of angels. This one is called An Angel's Asked About William Blake. You ask, was the young William Blake truthful, saying he saw a tree filled with angels, their wings glistening on every bough? Or was he sailing dangerously close to the shipwreck of a beating, weighing how far he dared frame such a fearful fallacy? You say perhaps they were just birds and young William was playing with words. Such an incident, if it ever occurred, would be less memorable to the heavenly host. Most would hardly notice a scruffy kid on a London street, even looking up into their tree. Was he visionary, his eyes bugging wide, in an apprenticeship of perceiving, having seen what others could not see? Or did he express his believing as though it were visible, stretching the faith he sought? You ask, was he mad, not knowing what was real? Or was he trying to test his perceptions? I say, good questions. And then we have an angel who's questioning Dorothy Sayers. This poem is called Murder Mystery. An angel puzzles over Dorothy Sayers. Why the interest in crime? Such a skilled writer investigating that curse? From an angelic perspective, at first it seemed worse than a waste of time. Her focus filled with grievous acts, never mind the facts being fictitious. A non-existent victim killed by an imagined killer, the body dumped in a stranger's bath. I wondered, what's got into her? What about thinking on the honest, the just, the pure? Why stare so intently into darkness until shadows take shape and grow particular? Any angel can tell you it all comes from sin. A young wife and her lover hide their affair. In her mind, she's justified. Later, when her husband's lost his life, does it matter, murder or suicide? To trace injury back to jealousy, or how an indiscretion may lead to a lie, and a lie to violence for the sake of silence, only shows the human heart. So, Dorothy, I'm beginning to see how what you do is a way of getting at the true. Stumping readers who will catch themselves jumping to false conclusions and hinting at a greater mystery, how justice will one day come through. Though for now, only the angels see. Thank you. My wife Gloria couldn't be here tonight, but we have loved John and Marion so much through the years. And I was asking Gloria about her impressions of Marion. And when I tell you what she said, you're going to be going, yeah, we've heard that, we've heard that, we've heard that, because everybody knows exactly what Marion's like. Gloria spoke about Marion's gift of hospitality, her smile, her warmth, and she said, and I quote, an inspiration to me being someone who seeks to entertain. She said that Marion's a role model, and her selections and presentations create a space of warmth, conversation, and community. And I really believe that, this is me talking now, I really believe that the effort that Marion has always put into feeding us honors the work that all the artists have put in to the presentations. And it just creates a community, which is so wonderful. So Marion, thank you.
Jeanine, are you out there? It's time for a little more music. Where's Jeanine? Oh, there you are, Jeanine. Please come. Jeanine Noyes was an early project in my sojourn with Imago, and I've known Jeanine over many years. I will say this, that her engaging musical style is one that Marion and I greatly enjoy, and her wonderful voice. How often, Marion, have we talked about her wonderful voice? I don't know if you know that, Jeanine, but we have. And it's a great pleasure to have her here this evening. She has a project with Imago where she's looking at some old hymns, and we're going to hear a little bit of that this evening. So Jeanine Noyes with
Henry
Henry.
Heilig,
Henry and some
Mike
guy at
Janzen.
the piano. I don't know. Anyway.
some other guy.
Yeah.
I'll just speak briefly about this project because many of you have heard about it before. It's been in the works for many years, and I have to say that I have tried 3 times to go into the studio and finish this project without success, but I will do it again. We have a different plan this time. Every time I go into the studio, I get really perfectionist and weird and a little bit anal and other unpleasant personality traits. So we're going to do it live, and we're just going to get a whole bunch of people in a room. Yes, that's the best way to do it. Yeah. With the very best band and the very best singers, and hopefully do it in a space where everybody can join in. So if you want to hear more about it, you can go to the Imago website. This is a song. So the project is called The Last Song You Forgot, and it's all about my mom who died of Alzheimer's. At the point where she couldn't lift a spoon to her mouth anymore, she played these old hymns on the piano. At the end of her life, I sang with another friend at her bedside. And so we're going to do, no, we're going to start with Softly and Tenderly. Am I? Oh, yeah. Sorry, there's conversation going on. So this is the song that I sang at the end. So I'll do it by myself first. I am thine. No, that's not the song I sang. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See on the portals, he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Come home, come home, you who are weary, come home, earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home. So my mom sang in a trio that sounded a lot like the Andrews Sisters back in the early 50s. And they traveled around Nova Scotia where there were tent meetings, and they sang these Come to Jesus songs, which I now have some personal trouble with. But anyway, at this moment, when I was singing to her late at night, it wasn't about calling people to the altar. I said, you've been here. It just seemed to be taking so long. And I said, you should go home. He's waiting. You should go join the choir. Could I ask you to sing along with me? Maybe you'd like to take a break and stand up. If you feel like it. Softly and tenderly. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See watching for you and for me. Come home, come home, come earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home, calling, oh sinner, calling, oh sinner, come home. Thank you for singing along. Here's one that, this one's for Marion. So I also have a couple of stories about Marion, mostly about food. But my first couple projects that I did with Imago, my account name was called Starting Artist, which I thought was very clever. But when we would have these big meals at John and Marion's, Marion would come peek her head out of the kitchen where you hardly ever saw her come out. But when she came, she would peek her head out the kitchen and go, "Starving artist, come here." And then she'd send me home with Tupperware full of food. I am thine, O Lord. I have heard thy voice, and it showed thy love to me. And I long to rise in the arms of faith and be closer drawn to thee. Sing along if you know it. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side. Consecrate me now to thy service, Lord, in the power of love divine. Let my soul look up with a steadfast hope, and my will be lost in thine. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side. Oh, the pure delight of a single hour that before thy throne I spend, when I kneel to pray, and with thee, my God, I commune as friend to friend. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side. Sorry. I'm so professional. Shall we gather at the river the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows to the throne of God. Thank you. Blessings.
Yeah. This may be a challenge for me to read, but I had thought of, I need to say a few things as we conclude. This is the end, except for one more thing from Jeanine. I'm very grateful to all of you for being here. Many people were in touch with me who would like to have been here, but were unable to be here. And we wanted this to be in part, well, actually in a big part, a celebration of Marion for all she's done. So let me many of you will have got this newsletter. Marion hasn't seen it. She normally reads it before I get it printed, but not this time. And that's because of what I have on the back here. My 25 years with Imago, this journey for me has been enlivening and enriching. And it's brought into my life opportunities, discoveries, and more importantly, people far beyond what I could have asked or imagined. The greatest gift for me in this journey has been the companionship of Marion. Maybe you should just read it. No, sorry. I'm not going to get through this. Anyway, the companionship and support and the wisdom of my wife, Marion. In so many ways, she has contributed to the shaping the character and ethos of Imago. Best known for the food that she so carefully and lovingly prepares for scores of Imago events over the years. And these include public events as well as soirees at our home. It has been standard to speak of Imago events as always including time at table. At the public events, after an evening of fine art presentations where we sit side by side, hearing, looking, listening about the art, we then move from there to the table. We've heard music and poetry and drama and dance, but the final act of the evening is the opportunity for face-to-face conversation. That's the important stuff, really important stuff. Not that the art isn't important, but face-to-face conversation is central. And we do that while enjoying the pleasures of good food and engaging together about the shared experience of the evening. And at the more intimate soirees where inspiring conversations took place and friendships were formed, we get to hear from an artist about their work, and I'm speaking about the soirees at our home. I want to say it's impossible to measure the benefits of those times at table, meeting old friends and making new friends, meeting the artists and simply giving thanks for the overflow of creativity that has been experienced together. Such a setting is fertile ground for the work of the Spirit and for inspiring gratitude to God for the gift of imagination. Marion has set the stage for facilitating these enriching and pleasurable encounters that have served to make Imago evenings so memorable. Brad, he comes for the food, right? That's what I'm thinking about. They have made them very memorable times. Quietly behind the scenes, Marion devoted herself to a practice that has carried her care and love into the lives of hundreds of folks who have attended Imago events over the past 25 years. Her contribution is not measurable, but its impact is deeply felt and well known by many. Marion has constantly given of herself in the exercise of the biblical virtue of hospitality. This gesture of making room for others, welcoming friend and stranger, and giving to all a sense that they belong and are loved. Thank you, Marion. Your loving presence has been deeply significant in making Imago what it is today. We're going to conclude the evening with something we've done from time to time, and I've always loved and enjoyed it, and so has Marion. Jeanine, please come back. Jeanine is going to, I like to refer to it as a benediction, a good word to conclude. She's going to sing Abide With Me. And maybe, I don't know, maybe, should I have people stand for this, Jeanine? I think so. Can we just stand and let it be a benediction as Jeanine sings for us? And then we go to the food, which Marion selected, but to be clear, she didn't make. But she selected it, so. Jeanine.
Abide with me, fast falls the eventide, the darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. I need thy presence every passing hour. What but thy grace can foil the tempter's power? Who like thyself my guide and stay shall be, through cloud and sunshine, Lord, abide with me. O thou who changest not, abide with me.
Amen. And thank you to each one of you for being here this evening. It's now time for that face-to-face thing I referred to. There's food at the back, opportunity for conversation and greeting one another. And I'm just so very grateful to each and every one of you for being here and all of you who participated in the program. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and good night.